the presentations you'll hear today. Jim is a Marquette alum and the founder of Rising Tides Analytics. So with that, Jim, take it away, and you'll lead us into the rest of the presentations for today.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Let me go ahead and start the screen share. So I met Scott about, 4 years or so ago. He was spinning up the business analytics program, and kind of to see where things have come in pretty short time periods is great. So as he said, I'm a Marquette alum, and happy to speak about my experience in industry. Our firm, Rising Tides Analytics, we focus primarily on Wisconsin companies, and quite frankly, there's a lot of manufacturers in Wisconsin. So we're going to give you kind of a brief overview today, and kind of touch on some of the subjects that some of our other great speakers are going to have. They're going to do some in-depth great use cases, but for me, just really let's kind of set the stage for today and talk about kind of manufacturing Wisconsin by the numbers. Going to briefly touch on Industry 4.0. For us, we also like to talk about, hey, how can you get some sort of quick wins in the business versus sort of on the manufacturing line itself. I think sometimes some of these initiatives are seen as kind of daunting, especially when you're talking Industry 4.0. But really, we like to focus on, hey, what are some of these quick wins that you've got kind of right at hand today? And we've got a couple of examples for those, kind of combining ERP, CRM data, maybe some supply chain and labor. And then just sort of go through kind of a brief history of data and where things are at today. So as Scott mentioned, graduate of Marquette, computer science. I had a lot of experience in corporate before starting my own thing, primarily worked kind of in financial services before starting Rising Tides about 4 years ago. And really, we help companies make better decisions with their data, both kind of strategically and with the implementation. All right, so let's kind of get into the numbers. So this is coming from the National Association of Manufacturers. So as you can see, as of 2020, about 63 billion is generated in Wisconsin from manufacturers. That represents about 20% of the state's GDP. And it actually kind of outperforms employment. You can see, only about 15% of employment is generating 20% of your outcome, and that represents about 500,000 or so employees. There was a great article written called "The State of Manufacturing in Wisconsin," and they go into some really interesting kind of insights around, okay, you can definitely see sort of the Rust Belt here in this map, and how important manufacturing is to a lot of the upper Midwest states. And again, because manufacturing in general is declining more slowly in Wisconsin, it produces a larger share of the national manufacturing product. Going into the specific counties in Wisconsin, again, you can see really where what's kind of the total share of employment in manufacturing in those counties. And again, you've seen that these gains have kind of been modest over time. And we think that especially as companies begin to move and adopt more of these Industry 4.0 practices, Wisconsin will continue to be able to produce more and more output with fewer workers. And this is one of the topics that we're going to kind of touch later, right? As manufacturing kind of switches, the people in manufacturing companies are kind of those demographics are changing over time. And one of the things in general, not just manufacturing, but the probability of automation and computerization. So if you actually kind of take a look at this, this is saying about 50% or so of if you take a look here, but a little bit more than 35% and 15 here have a pretty high probability of having some of their work being automated. So automation is definitely one of kind of the key elements of Industry 4.0, and can also help to solve some of the labor issues, as a lot of manufacturing does have sort of an aging workforce. And as the new workforce kind of comes in with more analytics skills to help manufacturing, what does that look like? And then just some interesting things that we found. Again, most manufacturers have the data, but the insights are hidden. So as opposed to other industries, it's actually usually pretty straightforward to be able to get data in manufacturing. Most companies are pretty familiar with where the data comes from, how it's used. But I think what we've seen is that a lot of that data is in these really aging legacy systems. So you see a lot of companies that are kind of struggling to get by, maybe using a lot of Excel, maybe using some Access. And what we see is if you can enable your internal subject matter experts with better tools and data, already there's a lot of great specific knowledge that you get working in manufacturing, just because it's so specific typically to that industry. If you just can kind of equip them with some better tools, they can help make some better decisions for you. And we talk about focusing on three things, right? The platform, the framework, and the people. So when we talk about the platform, we're really talking about what products are you using, both on kind of the data side, the analytics side, the system side, to enable your business to grow. The framework is really about the relationship typically between kind of IT and the business lines to figure out, hey, how are we going to work together to be able to actually get some of these insights? What does that look like? In industry in general, we see the framework changing from in the past. IT used to drive everything and do everything, to now you've got people that kind of expect information at their fingertips, similar to how they interact with things at home or on their phone. And then the last element is people, right? How are you going to upskill your people? We know that there's labor issues with manufacturing in general. And I think, again, the great thing with a lot of manufacturers is you've got great people who understand your business very well. How can you upskill them with some new technologies in an effective way to help them make better decisions for your business? And that sort of goes into kind of the last point that we've seen be kind of successful is elicit these use cases from the front line. A lot of people doing the day-to-day work, they usually have some of the best ideas around productivity and efficiency and things that would make kind of these small wins that would have disproportionate results. So just going to pull up a McKinsey slide on Industry 4.0. We know that this is where industry is going. It's characterized by these foundational technologies across all of manufacturing. It's connectivity, data, and computational power. It's analytics and intelligence. It's human-machine interaction and advanced engineering. And when you take it in its entirety, it seems very vast. And when you talk with people on the finance side, anything very vast usually has a large dollar price tag on it. So sometimes we see companies sort of having this kind of analysis paralysis, because this all sounds really expensive and this looks expensive. And in its entirety, that probably is the case. As companies need to get to Industry 4.0, we see a lot of, especially mid-sized manufacturers, figuring out, hey, where are we going to start getting value first? Where do we invest first? So we recommend kind of taking a pragmatic approach. How do you get sort of the most bang for your buck? Because when we're talking about Industry 4.0, we're really talking about sort of a complete digital transformation. And a lot of this is kind of rip and replace. There is really no great way to kind of salvage these, let's say 20-year-old PLC boards and a lot of these legacy systems that are actually, on your manufacturing line. There's no kind of quick and easy win typically on those. These are longer term, larger investments that are going to help the business. But, again, it's a little bit more nebulous. And, again, some of these topics that there's just a lot that's involved with Industry 4.0. And especially for small and mid-sized manufacturers, it is kind of daunting. So kind of going back to this concept of, hey, we know that industry 4.0 and a lot of these ideas and concepts, this is where you need to get to. But what are some of the things that you can do right now? And we recommend kind of focusing on maybe some of these in the business versus on the line uh, projects. Because we think that solving for some of these use cases will help you be able to go back to your board, to executives, and say, hey, we really do need to start thinking about making an investment in some of these elements on industry 4.0. But look at what we've done with our current data. Again, going back to this concept of manufacturers already have a lot of this data. They just are struggling maybe to get insights out of that data. So just kind of, again, some examples of kind of OTL versus ITB. Well, if you've got a lot of this data at hand where you can start doing some things around, let's say, customer segmentation, prioritization, knowing your customer, especially, we're going to dive a little bit more in depth into some of the COVID impacts a couple slides from now, but it really has shown how important it is to know your customer. How do you segment it the right way? What matters to them? Supplier redundancy and diversity. Are you covered on your supply chain? And you can actually use this. We've seen a company use this as a selling point. I think, again, as we're talking about an infrastructure bill coming down the road, you can go and use it as a selling point and say, hey, are your supply chains diverse enough to be able to support one of your suppliers failing? We've found that as a selling point. And then, again, there's a lot of really simple things that you can kind of just do some Pareto analysis on product lines. We see a lot of emphasis on meaningless variation. And these are all things that, with the data you have on hand, should be relatively straightforward to do. So going back to this thought of, all right, let's take a pragmatic approach to this. How are we going to get the most kind of bang for your buck? Again, and when we think about sort of these brownfield versus greenfield projects, so brownfield project is a project where you're taking over something existing that's pretty complex. It's going to require a lot of replacement. Versus these greenfield projects where sometimes when you're talking about large greenfield projects, those can be expensive. But we think nowadays you can do a lot of these greenfield projects that are quick wins that leverage some of these newer technologies that within a month or two, you can have something that has a pretty high impact with very low cost. We always recommend building out this sort of scatter plot for use cases. This is actually a great exercise to go through with Excel, just kind of mapping out, hey, what are your projects? What do we think is the effort and the impact? We know, again, that a lot of these industry 4.0 initiatives are going to be in the major projects, and they're going to have a disproportionate effect on the value of your company long term, yet they're also major investments. They're going to take a while. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there with the quick wins that really have high impact, and typically your frontline folks will have a pretty good idea on that. So, can we pick and choose the most realistic use cases to start showing these wins, build this momentum? We think that building of momentum and being able to again, take that to executives and the board to say, hey, look at what we can do just with the existing data with, maybe let's say moving some of that to the cloud, moving that together so we can get a holistic view of our data. Show what you can do right away. So we've got, some sample use cases here. One of the elements we're going to go through sort of with the history of data is, I think we've moved traditionally from, especially a lot of manufacturers, you're either going to be running for larger manufacturers, Oracle or SAP, or you may be running some mid-tier ERPs. But a lot of days, or a lot of times nowadays, you've got kind of these best-in-class products out there, whether that's Salesforce or ServiceNow or Workday, and you really have these systems that are generating this data. And typically, they have some pretty robust APIs to be able to get at all your data and pull it together. So how do you kind of blend some of this data together to better understand the drivers of customer satisfaction and churn? Do they care most about price? Do they care most about quality, delivery? Kind of what matters most to your customers? It's not uncommon to have a lot of companies not really know their customers well. And I think we've found, especially now as things are moving to personalization, just in B2C, we're also seeing that in B2B. What really matters the most for your customer, and how can you deliver for that? I talked a little bit earlier about supply chain with COVID impacts. Are you tracking the performance of your tier one, your tier two vendors? How is pricing changing? We know that in general, pricing for raw materials is up pretty significantly. Do you have backup vendors? What are kind of the risks in place? Are you sourcing from a diverse set of vendors in case of another sort of black swan event? And again, not only internally, but this also could be used as a sales opportunity to go out to companies and ask them the same question. Are you covered in events? Do you have local resources that you could be working with? Another a great use case is also around labor, especially in manufacturing. You've got an aging workforce. There's a significant risk from retirement, and really understanding what is that productivity and the cost to replace. Not only is there a lot of great tribal knowledge that most workforces have, but is that codified somewhere? Is that understood somewhere? And are you able to kind of take those numbers to executives and say, hey, this is kind of in the next 5-10 years, this is what we're thinking in terms of retirement, and this is what it's going to be the cost to replace the business. We think that this is something that's pretty easy to put together. Not a lot of companies have gone through that exercise. There's also kind of the flip side of that is there's, especially with a lot of these newer tools, particularly with some of these cloud-based databases, it's very easy to get access to external data. So you can pull data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and understand, are you being competitive in the market in terms of salary, hourly wages? What does the market health look like in general for your SIC code? All these things again are, we think, pretty low effort, but helps to kind of get companies thinking about, hey, let's start getting a more holistic view of our business. Let's start pulling our ERP together, our CRM together, maybe our service ticketing system together, our quality control, our customer service data, pull all that together.